why does boost start to fall after like 5,000 RPM on stock turbo, and it keeps climbing until red line on TEA10 for a B93.0 T? Yeah, that's a direct function of the size of the turbo and the amount of air it's able to flow. So you can think about there is a flow curve or map for the turbo, and there's a flow curve or map for the engine. And as you can surmise, as an engine revs higher, it sucks in more air. That's because every combustion event requires a certain unit of air to create combustion. If you do 3,000 of those in a minute, you use 3,000 units of air. If you do 6,000 in a minute, you use 6,000 units of air. So even though the efficiency of the motor falls off, it's ingesting more mass air at higher RPMs than lower RPMs. So you have an engine that's flowing more as it revs up, and you have a turbo that can flow a certain amount of air ever. So it has a maximum flow, which at a certain point it cannot flow anymore. The flow of the turbo is directly related to the boost it can produce. So when you have an engine that's revving using more and more air as it revs up, and you have a turbo that can hit its flow limit, then at lower RPMs where airflow is lower, it can produce a lot of boost, right? A lot of flow with a lot of boost. That high boost is supported by a certain amount of flow. But as the engine hits a point where the turbo can no longer flow more, then the boost has to drop to sustain any amount of pressure that the turbo can produce. I was trying to think, while I was talking about this, I was trying to think of an analogy, and I didn't come up with anything super definitive. But yeah, the turbo, let's say, can produce 500 horsepower worth of air, but the engine can outflow that. So the amount of boost goes up and then down. Now, when you make the turbo bigger and you increase the flow limit, that higher level boost can be supported all the way to red line. And so what you see with turbo like the A10 is its maximum flow limit is matched nicely to the flow limit of the engine. And so as the engine hits its maximum flow, so is the turbo, and they both produce peak power at the same time, and that boost level can be maintained quite well all the way to red line. The bigger the turbo you have, the more flow it can produce, the more easily that turbo can maintain a very high level of boost all the way to red line. The stock turbo just can only produce that level of flow up to about 4,500, 5,000 RPM, and then that boost starts dropping.
Yeah, the turbo's going to sit at that same flow while the engine's going to need more.
Yeah,
about the same. So you've got to reduce the pressure to maintain that level of flow.
Yeah. For some reason, there's a metaphor about a sausage making machine and the density of the sausages coming out. So it's I'll have to mold that.
You have to noodle that a little more.
Yeah. Great question, though.
Yeah.
Very good question.
It's a tough one that a lot of people, without knowing kind of the physics behind it all, don't easily grasp.
If you would ever like to understand more about turbochargers and how they work, I would strongly recommend reading a book called Maximum Boost by Corky Bell. I think I read that book in the late 90s.
Yeah, it's an older book, but all of the fundamentals are obviously still going to be very applicable.
It holds up, and even though it seems kind of basic, if you have a mastery of everything in that book, you could become like a turbocharger engineer.
Yeah, you'll be in a good spot to understand.
Yeah, you could certainly do tuning like we have done.
Yeah, I would say other than some obviously like aerodynamic efficiencies and whatnot on the turbos haven't changed fundamentally.
How they work hasn't changed,
especially on these cars where we're not dealing with variable vanes or anything like that. It's just a turbo and a base cake. And variable vanes, yeah, because there were VT stuff was certainly around.
That's truck stuff going back to the 80s.
But yeah, I mean, turbos have just gotten, the modeling's gotten better. The design systems around them have gotten better, but the fundamentals are all identical.
They all work the same.
The engines are transforming themselves around that turbo, with variable cams, variable lift, variable, everything. But yeah, the fundamentals of the turbocharging process is